Reddit is a very widespread website where you can find almost anything for your entertainment, but just like everything else, there's a darker side to it. Today, we will be exploring a series of real and disturbing stories that Reddit users have decided to share with us. Enjoy. Both of my parents are from the UK, so when I was young, we would go visit my grandparents there over the summer. Usually, it would be planned such that my cousins would go at the same time as us, so as it ended up, all the adults would sleep in the upstairs bedrooms, while all the kids would be sleeping on the floor in the living room. Of course, we stayed up all night playing video games. Late one night, we hear a crashing sound, and all look up at the huge window sliding doors in the living room that border the back garden. We see a figure crashing through the backyard fence, sprint across the backyard, and peer into the large glass window at our young terrified faces. He gives us a quick grin and sprints to the other side of the yard and hops the fence and is gone. All of this happens in the space of about 10 seconds. Needless to say, my cousins, siblings and I all dart upstairs and awaken all the adults. Cops are called and they start searching the area and knocking on neighbors' doors. One house doesn't respond, and eventually they choose to break in. They find an entire family of 3 generations and 6 members murdered in their beds. It was a random attack, as they caught the guy a few hours later and he had no connection to the family at all. I don't want to think what would have happened if he picked my grandparents' house instead. So I have a memory from when I was younger, about 4, when this old woman came to live with us. She was my great aunt, but at the time I didn't really understand all those levels of extended family, so I just thought she was some random woman. I called her the Candy Lady, and you'll see why. She was staying in my mom's sewing room, which I know I thought was odd because it had no bed and she didn't have a suitcase or anything, which I thought was odd, but being 4, I really had no way of articulating this, so I just went with the punches. But this lady was really nice and wanted to talk to me all the time. Whenever I was in the room, she would ask me questions about preschool, my dog, my cats, my room, my friends I play with down the street, even the injured birds we found and rehabilitated, which had just happened, so I was very excited that she knew about this. She always carried this black fur coat with her, and it had candy in the pockets, and she would give me pieces. It was a very normal visit from what I remember. Like I said, I was 4 years old, so it's relatively hazy, but I remember moments that pop out, like the questions and the code, and how she would just sit quietly with my mom in the kitchen while I played. After about 2 weeks, she left. One day I came home from school and realized she was no longer there, and life carried on as usual. Fast forward to my 13th birthday, I'm out for dinner with my mom, and I mentioned that time that the great aunt Flora stayed with us. I now knew her name and face from photos and stories, but I knew she had long since died and I had seen her again after that one time. So I brought up her visit and my mom said, "No, great aunt Flora never stayed with us and you never got to meet her before she died." So I started thinking maybe I have the wrong name. We have a big family as is, and I don't know all of my grandparents' many siblings. So I say, "Oh, maybe not her, I'm thinking of the one who ran the candy shop in that small town, the one you grew up with." And she goes to say that yes, I'm thinking of Aunt Flora, and I tell her I'm sure she stayed with us. Then my mom gets a weird look on her face. She goes all quiet and listens to me recounting my memories before she tells me her version. Right before the visit, my mom went on a trip to the hometown of my great Aunt Flora because she was sick with the flu and needed help around the house with her candy shop. My mom was extremely close to her growing up and wanted Flora to meet her first baby, me. Flora assured her she would, no matter what. My mom came back home and about a week later, Flora came down with pneumonia and died. My mom said shortly after the funeral, which only my mom attended because I was young and my dad worked a lot, I started talking with an imaginary friend, or that's what she thought, except it was weird because I could usually only focus on imaginary friends for a few days before I grew bored of them, and this one was sticking around, and I usually gave them voices and talked for them. This one, however, it was like I was taking part in one side of the conversation. When asked, I told her I was talking to the Candy Lady, or as my mom now believes, the ghost of my great aunt Flora, staying true to her word and meeting her youngest grandniece. The black coat, I also found out, was the one my mother had left in Flora's will, and when she got it, she found candy in the pocket. "2012, June, around the time of the solstice, Yellowstone. I was an employee in the park and had just wrapped up a 15-mile hike up and back up some mountains. My legs were achy and tired. Moreover, my whole body felt warm and radiant, worn and ready for sleep. I walked down the half-mile dusty road that led to where my car was, and a small handful of abandoned overnighters' vehicles were parked. I was so relieved to see my car, Beaker, waiting there faithfully for me. Twilight was setting in heavily, and I felt deeply satisfied with my day. I unlocked my door and swung my day pack in the passenger seat, hit the ignition and... shit. My car was unresponsive. Dead. I had left my lights on. But at least it's summertime and cold won't kill me. People forget about Yellowstone, but parts of it are legitimately remote. The elements can and will kill you, and there are multiple incidents in the park every year. Drownings, falls, maulings, burns, exposure. They all exist as real risks. And all in a place where cell reception is spotty at best. It is woefully remote. There is only one single fuzzy radio station. Everything else is static. There is no TV and no internet, and my cell phone had 5% battery left on it. I rallied. I walked to the hilltop and tried to get a call out, I thought. My nervousness helped my tired muscles get me moving, and I got lucky. After the first few failed tried and some dropped calls, I placed a call to the park ranger dispatch, and he said that he would swing by and wait by my car. I went back to Beaker and awaited his rescue. 30 minutes later, I hear the gravel popping up as the vehicle slowly crawled into the trailhead parking lot, and it was the ranger's cruiser. He said he didn't have any jumpers with him, but he dispatched the wrecker crew to me, and they will be with me in an hour and a half. He said he had a few other campsites to secure and excused himself since darkness was setting in, and he promised to return in an hour or two to check on me after he had secured the other campsites. I thanked him and he left. I popped my hood and set my hood up as a signal to the wrecker to see me in my car in the dark. He got in my car and began a sleepy wait for the mechanic. About 45 minutes passed slowly by. There was no moon that night and the sky had clouded over, making it more dark than typical Yellowstone. Sometimes the stars are so bright that they illuminate the surroundings, but not tonight. It was black. Out of stillness and boredom, I tried cranking my ignition a few times, and my car gave some meager clicks and then nothing. That's when I heard the crackling on the gravel road again, and was so happy to see the wrecker kicking up dust as it crawled towards me. Except it wasn't the wrecker. It was a large pickup, and it pulled slowly into the campsite. Very, very slowly. Foot off the gas slowly. As it did, it panned the span of the parking area with its lights on. Ranger? I wondered, blinded from the lights. My eyes adjusted. No, not a ranger vehicle. It had certainly seen me. Me in the other car, and my hood up, sitting there idiotically like a lame duck. The pickup rolled over so slowly into the parking area and hauled up on the far side of the row of the vehicles I was in. And then some questionable things began to happen. I heard the truck shut off. My stomach tightened. Then it turned on again. It revved its engine loudly. It rolled forward about 10 feet, then reversed back into the space slowly. Then forward, then back. This went inexplicably for about 5 minutes. I felt my body clicking into a very aware mode. I adjusted my rear view just to be able to see my rear passenger side better. I got my day pack, zipping pockets back shut. For some reason I still had my seatbelt on. I smoothly unconnected it and unlocked my driver door, ready to run if I was approached. I'll take the Grizz and mountain lions over anyone coming at me. The truck was still ritually pulling forward and backing in. It was so odd. I could make no other sense of it than that the driver and whoever else was in the truck had seen me and was trying to intimidate me. Then the truck shut off and did not come back on. Fuck. I couldn't see anything. It was so dark outside. Then I heard a faint car door shut. I listened hard and didn't hear any more, but I couldn't be sure. I thought about ducking down and try to hide in my car, but if the person approached me directly, or if they were armed, I would be screwed. I decided, since I had certainly been seen, I made a key decision. I decided I would be assertive. The person, a man, a silhouette in the blackness with a white or tan cowboy hat up top, tall and middle-aged, sauntered slowly down the row of cars towards mine. I tried to keep glancing in my rear view, watching out not to be distracted and ambushed by anyone else, The man had a steady walk and strolled unaffectedly about 20 or 15 feet in front of the cars. He appeared at complete ease, nearly happy, and that made me excitedly more uncomfortable. His path brought him nearly in front of my car. I took a breath and steeled myself. I looped my daypack on my right shoulder and clutched my canister of bear spray in my right hand. I had the safety off and it jangled. It was glowing faintly in the dark, clanking against my canister. My left hand popped my door and I threw my legs out and stood up. Partially covered by my open door, I stood up and called to him. "Excuse me," I called, as he slowed his gait. Something about the casual way he did it appeared nearly interested and amused. He stopped his stroll and turned towards me. "Excuse me," I said again, "do you happen to have any jumpers?" He surveyed, then, "What?" he asked. "Jumper cables, do you happen to have any?" He paused and seemed to take stock. He was slow in his replies. No, I don't believe I do," he replied. "Okay, well, thanks anyway," I said. He stood there for a moment, facing me. I could only tell from seeing his hat brim turn towards me, then turned and continued his casual walk towards the trailhead marker and map sign. He stood out there for about 5 minutes, just standing there. He hadn't brought a light or a pack or anything. It was too dark to read, and there aren't any lights in Yellowstone's backcountry. He pretended to read the displayed map and sign at the trailhead. He surveyed the view, or pretended to. Then, he turned and began to walk, approaching me again. My skin was cold, and my breathing was fast at this point. I knew he was full of shit and had no business being in the parking lot. I knew he looked weird at this point, and also seemed to give delightfully few fucks. He neared my car again as he strolled in front. He remarked, "Nice night out," he said as he stopped about 15 feet in front of me. He was so confident, he made me mad. It was like he was savoring my fear. My voice reflected my panic, but my anger too. "What are you doing here?" My words knifed the air. He could hear the tightness in my voice, but too, I had it locked down. He calculated, and he advanced toward me. "I came to check out the trailhead. So, do you have anyone coming?" He was full of shit. No one does that at this time of night. He was sizing me up. In fact, as he awaited my reply, he took a step towards me. "Yeah, I'm waiting on the wrecker and ranger. They said they'd be here in 5 minutes now." It was a lie. I still had half an hour of waiting before I saw either again. But he didn't know that. And to underscore my point, I stood tall and slung my large canister of grease spray into my left hand, aimed at him. I couldn't see if he saw it or not. He took another step towards me. He maybe was now under 15 feet, perhaps as near as 10. "You sure you don't need any help?" he offered. He stepped again. I raised my canister and jangled the safety around. It was impossible to ignore. I knew he had seen it. "Nah, those guys should be here any minute, but thanks," I replied. Damn, my polite Catholic upbringing. I had braced myself. I knew the next words from my mouth were going to break the social contract apart with, "If you came any closer, I will spray the fuck out of you. Back off." He was that close now. He paused and weighed his options. Then he casually turned and began to ease back towards his truck. He said something, but I was so hyper-focused on his body that I can't remember what he said. I just watched his body slowly merge back into the darkness. I heard his truck door slam. His truck turned back on, and he did the weird fucking ritual again of revving his engine, rolling forward, and reversing for at least 5 minutes again. Then, practically in neutral, he rolled out of the lot, down the dirt road, his truck slipping immediately behind the small droves and hills. I now acted on instinct. I grabbed my pack and spray and bailed out of the car. I slinked quietly across the lot and crept around the far side of the long horse trailer, waiting, listening, seeing if he would come back. Time passed and my heart began to slow back down. 20 or 30 minutes crawled by. I began to accept the fact that he wasn't coming back. I waited for noise. I saw headlights. It was a wrecker. I got my jump and got back home. Along the way, I got cell reception, had a few voicemails from my best friend. She said she just had a very bad feeling and called me trying to reach me. Her voice was nervous in her voicemails, and she literally never panics. I was born and raised in the country outside a small Indiana town. I lived in a house that my great-great-great-great-grandfather and his brothers built, as well as 4 other homes directly around my house. I lived in a house that my great-great-great-great-grandfather and his brothers built, as well as 4 other homes directly around my house where his brothers and their wives lived back in their time. So, by the time I lived in it as a child, it was well into 100 years old and had been remodeled by my grandma and grandpa in the 1970s. So before we lived there, my maternal grandparents lived there. My grandpa was diagnosed with idiopathic cystic fibrosis of the lungs way back in the 80s. And 2 years later, he was blessed with receiving the first lung transplant in northern Indiana. At a very young age, I have 2 distinct memories of him being home with oxygen tubes in his nose and pulling his oxygen tank around the house to sit in his favorite recliner. He passed away in 1991 from rejection. So, the creepy part. Back in 2006, I was pregnant with my first child and near my due date. It was during the day and I was really uncomfortable and my hips and lower back were hurting. So I decided to drive to mom and dad's and take a nap in their waterbed, thinking the heat may help. So I get there and mom and I sat in the kitchen to talk for a few minutes. During the conversation, I distinctly hear a squeak like squeaky tires. I kind of nonchalantly look around to see where the noise was coming from. I don't see anything, so I glance at my mom and see if she's looking around too. Right as I'm about to ask her if she heard that, I see from the corner of my eye a figure walk past the entryway to the kitchen, walking into the living room. Since I was already looking at mom, hence why I saw it out of the corner of my eye, I could see she definitely saw something as well, and her eyes got that deer in the headlights look, and her face went pale. She looked at me and put her finger over her closed mouth like a shh sound, and we both stood up quietly and walked to the kitchen living room entryway and looked into the living room. In the living room, the recliner mom had was rocking back and forth like someone was sitting in it and rocking. I look back at mom with a "are you fucking seeing this" expression. I snap my head back around and plainly see my dead, for this time 15 plus years, grandfather sitting in the chair, rocking for about 2 rocks. I quickly glance at mom just to make sure she's seeing this, and look back and he was gone and the chair was completely still. Legit the freakiest thing that has ever happened to me. I wasn't scared, just disbelief. So glad my mom was there, or I would have thought I went insane. When I was young, around 11 years old, my dad lived in an old log cabin about 15 miles west of Sheridan, in the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains. Every summer when I was visiting, we would go up the mountains backpacking and fishing for 2 days every weekend. We would park the truck, hike into a remote area fishing for trout along the way, and make camp wherever we ended up. We encountered a number of strange, creepy things and got into some scary situations with wildlife, but the one that sticks with me the most was an ancient, abandoned camp we found. We were hiking down a very steep slope to get to an area of creek that had been dammed up by beavers, hoping to catch some big trout. I had climbed out on a rock ledge and was looking for a way down when I saw the stack and action of an old rusty rifle sticking out of a tree, where the tree had grown around the barrel years before. Dad and I climbed down to check it out, and we found a small cave at the base of the rock formation, only about 12 inches deep, which would make a nice neutral shelter but a really terrible place to set up a long-term camp. Inside, we found a bunch of really old stuff, 3 heavy-gauged, unopened cans of food, an old cast iron pot that had holes rusted all the way through it, a crusty old saddle and bridle set, and a very deteriorated heavy wool blanket rolled up and tied with a leather belt. When we unwrapped the blanket, we found several personal items, including a rusty old cap and a ball black powder revolver, a leather satchel with a lead pistol shot, a powder horn with no black powder in it, tarnished old cartridges, presumably for the rifle in the tree, a straight razor, and most unsettling was a shirt with holes in it, and over half of it was stained with dried blood. As we stood there thinking about what all this meant, it occurred to me how remote this place was even at that time. It was July of 1985, and the fact that whoever owned that shirt had been seriously injured, stuck on a steep slope in the middle of absolutely nowhere. I got serious chills down my spine. The only thing that somewhat dated this fateful campsite was the pistol and the rifle, both of which were made sometimes in the 70s according to my father. there's no way to ever know what happened to the man who owned all of this stuff, but the fact that he or someone he knew was obviously shot twice with either a gun or arrows, and all of his belongings were seen right where he left them, possibly 100 years later, it was highly unlikely he left the area alive. Discovering what amounts to a 100-year-old crime scene in the very remote wilderness kinda gave me the creeps, but mostly, it just made me sad to know how hopeless and alone this guy was, and how he felt before he died. It was 1985, I was 9 years old, and we had been backpacking into that wilderness area for 2 days. Cameras were pretty heavy back then, so we never carried one, and GPS wasn't invented yet. I asked my dad if I could keep the pistol, and he simply said, "It's not mine to give. We aren't thieves." He chose instead to teach me a lesson about respecting the dead and preserving history. He had been very careful inspecting everything, and we put everything back exactly how we found it. My dad then told me to take off my hat and observe a moment of silence and reflection as a sign of respect for the man who had most likely lost his life on that mountain. Then we went fishing. I tried several times over the years to find that spot again, especially now that I have sons of my own, but I've never been able to. A family that lived across the street from me had 2 daughters, 7 and 8 years old I think. They shared a bedroom, which wasn't too weird, but when my family visited them, the parents gave a tour of the house. They had an extra room aside from the kids' bedroom, which was completely empty, and they wouldn't show us inside the kids' room. I was never allowed to play in their house, which didn't strike me as weird at the time because I was young and I preferred to play outside. One time they spent the night at my house, and in the middle of the night I woke up to both of them opening my closet and squatting down to pee in it. I got my mom and she interrogated those kids about it, but they acted like it was a perfectly normal thing to do. They explained that they weren't allowed outside of their room at night, so if they had to use the toilet, they had to do it in their closet. I didn't really understand it at the time, but it pissed off my mom a lot and made her really suspicious. She did not let them stay the night at our house anymore, but she kept a close eye on them and asked the kids a lot of questions. They were kicked out of the house around 8 in the morning and told to play outside with no supervision. They weren't allowed back until nighttime and always ate dinner outside no matter what the weather was. They ate snacks at my house sometimes, and I think that and dinner might have been their only meals. Both of them always had a backpack with them, but they never opened it and would never tell me what was inside. I suspect the backpacks had their clothes in them, but they weren't allowed in their rooms during the day, and they made some really weird comments about stuff I had in my room, like the dresser. Not sure what was happening to them, but their parents definitely wanted nothing to do with them. They ended up moving out really suddenly, and I suspect my parents called CPS or something on them. I really hope they're okay. When I was in university, I was walking home from the bars in Ottawa with my roommate at the time. It was about 11 AM and we were looking forward to getting home and ordering some pizza when we came across 2 guys and a very drunk girl. Initially, we didn't think anything about it because it was a pretty common sight on a Friday, but as we walked behind them for a few minutes, we noticed how out of it she was. One of the guys was essentially carrying her, and her clutch was loosely dangling from her limp wrist. Our street came up, but instead of turning down, we decided to see what was going on. The guys explained that she was one of their girlfriends and had too much to drink, so they were taking her home. We asked them a few questions, like what bar they were at, where she lived, and if she was an Ottawa student, etc. They gave us pretty convincing answers, but all the same seemed really uncomfortable and wanted us to go away. During the conversation, the guy holding his girlfriend shifted her position to get a better grip, which caused her arm to dangle down and drop her clutch. Before they could move, my roommate grabbed the clutch and took out her ID. My roommate then asked if they knew her first and last name along with her birthday. This is where things changed. The other guy got really aggressive and confrontational while the other went silent. They didn't know her name or birthday. I then pulled out my phone and called the police. The guy dropped her and took off running. We waited with her for about 10 minutes until the police and EMS got there. We gave them a statement but did not have much to go on other than their descriptions. Police told us they suspected she had been dosed and that she was lucky we happened to walk behind her. pretty scary stuff. My mom had a stalker for years. She was maybe in her early 30s. I was about 3 years old and my brother was around 1 when this started. My dad would leave for work in the morning, and as soon as he was gone, the calls would start coming in. She'd answer the phone and some guy would be saying all these horribly sadistic and sexual things about what he wanted to do to my mom. She was beyond frightened and didn't know what to do. Sometimes the caller would just describe what she was wearing at the very minute or describe what she was doing. My parents were struggling financially at the time, so they couldn't just up and move, but my mom started spending more and more time at my dad's mother's house when he was away. The cops eventually got involved, but they couldn't trace the call. Finally, they were able to save up enough money to move. I was about 6 by this time. The phone number was changed and unlisted in the phone book. This was around the 80s, so everyone was still using landlines. My mom never got another scary phone call, but she had nightmares about it for years. When I was little, I remember going into her bedroom in the morning and she would be sobbing into her pillow. I didn't understand it at that point, but she explained later in life that she'd wake up from a nightmare and just shake and cry. A couple months after we had moved, the cops informed us that they finally caught the guy. It was our next door's neighbor's 18-year-old son. He had been in the military and was discharged due to severe mental illness. I guess he was put into some sort of special security home that specializes in mental health. The lead investigator said that the son was obsessed with my mother, and they found a box in his room full of a bunch of photographs taken of her when she was out in the garden or playing with us kids in the yard. The year is 2002, it's late at night and I'm driving to my parents' house that's some way outside the city, basically in the middle of nowhere. A truck cuts me off at an intersection on my way to the highway. I had right of way and would have plowed straight into the truck if I hadn't slammed on the brakes. I honked the horn at him and give him the middle finger, which I doubt he sees, and just pass him as we get on the highway. A little while later, I turn off the highway and notice that the same truck turns the same way. The roads are smaller and it's dark, so I'm driving at the speed limit and the truck catches up to me. He's getting uncomfortably close now, and even though I start speeding up, he just gets closer and closer. When the truck is like 3 feet from my rear bumper, I accelerate as fast as I can and get a couple of 100 yards between us so I can quickly turn at the next intersection. He follows. I hit the accelerator and turn again when the next intersection comes along. So I'm racing down these country roads that are barely wide enough for the truck and this asshole is keeping up. My heart is beating like crazy, but I also know the area and the roads, and as we get into the roads that run through the woods, I turn off my headlights, drive like a maniac, and manage to turn to an even smaller road without him possibly seeing me take the turn. I can't keep driving because I know the road just goes to a cabin and ends there, so I come to a stop a bit down the road and to the side, so the trees will cover me, and turn off my engine. Then I wait. After a while, I can see his headlights on the road I turn off from. He's driving slower now. He stops at the intersection and shines a flashlight down the road to where I am. He's looking to my direction for what feels like minutes, and I hope the flashlight can't reach all the way to where my car is. Finally, he drives away. I wait for a couple more minutes, then head back to the main road and continue to my parents' house. A few years back, I woke up in the middle of the night. We had a 2-month newborn sleeping in the room next door. I had a video monitor on my bedside table so that my wife and I could easily check on him. So I clicked the button that turns on the video image, and what I saw scared me like nothing ever before. My baby boy was gone. Now, I know that instincts should have made me run right into the baby's room. Instead, I just froze. I looked over and my wife was sleeping next to me. Finally, I moved, but not to run into the other room, like I should have done. Instead, I turned up the volume on the baby monitor. I heard another woman's voice singing a lullaby. I'm not kidding, another woman was singing to my baby in a very soft, gentle and melodic voice. I don't remember what song it was, something like "Go to sleep little baby." Finally, my freeze broke. I jumped up, ran through the hallway and burst into my boy's room. He was sound asleep in his crib. No woman, no singing. Last year, my family went camping at the same park we go to every year. Usually, we also get the same site, which is close to the toilets and showers. This year, however, we booked a bit late and we were placed way out into the back of the park, which is a fairly secluded area surrounded by woods. It was a nice change, but a bit of a hassle, lots of walking to go fishing, go to the toilet, etc. The first night we were there, my nephew woke up in the middle of the night, woke up my sister and told her that there was someone outside the tent. She said something, then leaned up on the tent. He got scared and pushed back. She got outside and there was nothing to be seen. We just dismissed it as a trash panda, even though my sister didn't think that was the case. The second night we had a few friends over. They brought their dog, who is the most well-behaved dog I've ever met, both with humans and other animals. We were all sitting around the fire when the dog started barking like crazy. She was tied to a picnic table sort of away from the fire and people. This was a super rare occurrence, so the owner got up to see what was going on. When he took the leash off the table, she went crazy and pulled him towards the forest. She actually pulled him a good 10 feet. He obviously wasn't expecting her to do that. She had never acted this way before. I decided to grab a flashlight and check out the forest in the direction she was pulling. There was nothing. She had seen squirrels, raccoons, cats, etc., and had never acted this way before. Everyone took note of how odd that was, but again we just dismissed it as nothing. However, it did spark up a conversation about the thing outside the tent from the previous night. The third and final night we were there, we could see a storm coming in. The sky was lighting up, the thunder was loud, and the wind was crazy, obviously unrelated to the eerie events, but relevant to the story. Eventually, everyone was crawling into their tents for the night, knowing that the storm was going to hit any second. I was the last to get in because I had to use the toilet. I was at the edge of the site, facing the forest. The storm and the forest were spooky enough, but what happened next will forever be burned in my memory. From the forest, I hear the sound of a little girl singing, not like a fast-paced pop song, but a song with the tempo of a nursery rhyme. I couldn't make out any words, but I was certain I was hearing the voice of a small girl. There were no other voices. I hurried up as much as I could. The second I finished, I turned towards my tent. A loud bang of thunder sounded, and I jumped into my tent just as it started to rain. My heart was pounding and I was sweaty. In the morning, I told my family. I feel like no one really believed me, but it happened and it was terrifying. So this actually happened pretty recently, and I hope I can properly do the story justice. This happened the weekend before Christmas, so a few details to set up the scene. When you walk down the stairs of my house, you can see the front door at about the last 2 steps. Also, my roommate's dog is a little shit and claws at the blind so anybody can see in through the bottom of the window. Anyways, me and my buddy are up in my room because I keep my good beer in my mini fridge because I can't trust anybody. On our way down the stairs, we're just having normal casual conversation about work or something like that. Then we get to the point where we can see the front door, and there's this creature crouched down, smiling in with their face pressed to the window and staring through our souls with black eyes. I completely freeze and my friend says, "What the hell is that?" My first thought is that someone we know was knocking on the door, but we didn't hear it being upstairs. After about 1 second of me focusing in, I realized that it's absolutely not the case. My friend yells this time, "What the hell is that?" and he bolts back upstairs, leaving me to face this thing on my own. I see that this creature is a female, and it scared the living shit out of me because I expected her to be as scared as us and try to run away. But she was smiling, showing about 2 teeth, and seemed overly pleased to see me, which gave me the total creeps. I didn't know if my door was locked, and I didn't know if she was going to try and come in and do witchcraft on us. I didn't really know how to move anymore. I just tried to evaluate what my move should be, because I was sure going back upstairs was not the correct choice. And then she started to speak, but I couldn't understand what the hell she was saying through the glass. Then she pointed in my house, and that's when I realized she was pointing at my Christmas lights. See, I host a huge Christmas party every year and go all out in decorations, and this year we turned the refrigerator into an 8-foot snowman. This is what she was coming to see. Once I realized this, I started laughing quite uncontrollably, still scared and confused because she just kept staring at me. My friend came down and we moved out of her sight. I let the dogs in so they can bark at her and maybe she'd leave. They did bark and we stayed out of view, but she just started jiggling the door handle, which turned out it was locked. I looked at my buddy like, what in the actual fuck is happening and what is she thinking? So I ran over there to push the dogs back and decided to take the plunge and go outside. It was a homeless woman who truly looked like a troll, literally 2 teeth and very dark eyes. But she turned out to be nice. I decided to chit-chat with her for a few and then tell her we were leaving. This strategy was a success. The worst part is that we told a bunch of friends that night, and I've had about 3 people crouching down in that scary ass position, staring at me when I've come down the stairs. I can't trust anybody.